We first turn to some breaking news regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The founder of the Russian mercenary group known as Wagner says his forces will leave the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut early next week. Yevgeny Prigozhin earlier published this video filmed in front of dozens of corpses he said were Wagner soldiers. He blamed Russia's top defense officials for heavy losses and accused them of starving his forces of ammunition. The Wagner Group has spearheaded Russian attempts to capture Bakhmut since last summer. Let's talk more about this announcement with our correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv and DW's Russia analyst Roman Goncharenko joining us from Bonn. Roman, let's start first with how credible this announcement is. Help us understand how seriously we should take it.
Well, we should take it very seriously. This is an escalation that is unprecedented so far. So we had heard criticism by Mr. Prigozhin of the Russian Defense Ministry for months now, but what we've seen in the past 24 hours is unprecedented. So he actually, a few hours ago, he published a video showing corpses of soldiers, saying those were killed just a few hours ago, many corpses, probably dozens of them. He also used very strong language and named personally the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, and his deputy head of the Russian General Staff, Mr. Valery Gerasimov, blaming them for starving his Wagner Group of ammunition. So it is a very big escalation. So he's claiming he's receiving only 30 or even 10% of what he needs. We cannot verify it. But the fact that the Wagner Group is not able to take Bakhmut, the fighting continues, and the Wagner Group is suffering heavy losses, is an indication there is a very huge problem for Russian forces there.
And what about the Wagner Group's claim that they are going to leave Bakhmut? I mean, is that really what we expect is going to happen, or is this just a threat from Prigozhin?
Well, it could happen, but it would be a great embarrassment for the Russian authorities, for Vladimir Putin, the president himself, because it comes just a few days before the 9th of May, which is the day when Russia and the Soviet Union celebrate the victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. So the time is very, very embarrassing for Putin and for Russian army. Prigozhin could pull out his forces from Bakhmut, but it doesn't mean that the city would fall back to Ukrainian hands, because Wagner is not the only force that is fighting there. A Russian regular army is also fighting by Bakhmut, so they will probably take to hold the positions that Wagner was able to take. But the situation is very, very volatile. It is absolutely unclear how this will end. But the language that Mr. Prigozhin is using is an indication that probably the Russian defense minister might be forced to go. So I cannot imagine the situation will continue like this for weeks now.
And Nick, I want to come to you for your perspective from Kyiv. What would Wagner forces' withdrawal from Bakhmut mean for the situation there?
Well, as you heard from Roman there, it's not just Wagner in and around Bakhmut. You also have the regular Russian army. What I would say, though, I think that would mean for now, if they were to leave, the end of the Russian assault on Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut. I think the Russian regular army will probably be able to hold what they have already taken, but I think they're not willing to risk lives on a scale that Wagner has, throwing people basically at very well-defended Ukrainian positions. Huge losses there. I think that's not something the regular army would do. So you'd probably see the kind of theatre of war there in Bakhmut coming to a standstill and things basically being frozen for the moment.
So in a bigger picture sense, how big of a role are they playing on the front lines, Nick?
They've been absolutely crucial to Russia making any progress whatsoever. You'll remember those extraordinary images of Yevgeny Prigozhin going to Russian jails, offering people the chance to get out if they're willing to fight. And they have really not spared their people. They've had extraordinary losses. Some images doing the rounds there of special graveyards being dug in Russia for all the Wagner recruits, some of whom spend very little time on the battlefield before coming back in a coffin. And by basically not paying any much attention to their people's security, they have been able to, often in the absence of kind of heavy technology, to gain positions, to throw the Ukrainians back who aren't in the position to risk the lives of their recruits in the same way in a democratic society here in Ukraine. So they really have been basically the only thing giving Vladimir Putin anything to be happy about in Ukraine over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah. And yet, Roman, this does sound likely to reignite tensions between the Wagner Group and Russia's defense ministry. We saw that expletive-laden video from Prigozhin just there. What does the announcement tell us about what we're looking at in terms of a power struggle internally within the Russian forces?
Well, there were signs of a power struggle before, in the months before, but what we are seeing now is really unprecedented, as I've just said. And one of the very influential Russian politicians supporting people like Wagner, and Wagner has supporters in the Russian politics, those who are called hawks or hardliners or supporters of even more brutal war in Ukraine. One of those politicians wrote on Telegram, on that messenger, that the situation really reminds him of what happened in Russia in 1917, when after the First World War, there was a revolution. So the Russian army was suffering defeat in that war, and that led to a revolution. So he says, we're not there yet, but the situation is very, very dangerous. And now I understand, he wrote, how such revolutions happen. And this is very, very remarkable, the language he uses and the comparison. This is something that Ukraine has been hoping for, that there will be unrest in Russia. And this is a sign that things could develop in that direction.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that analysis. That's our correspondent, Nick Connolly in Kyiv, and DW's Russia analyst, Roman Goncharenko in Bonn. We're going to try to come back to you later in the program for more. Really appreciate that for now. Now, as we've mentioned, Yevgeny Prigozhin has emerged as a key player in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He's been in charge of a private army of mercenaries leading the Russian onslaught in key areas of the war. Let's take a closer look at him.
Not a day goes by without commentary from Russia's most vocal oligarch, Yevgeny Prigozhin, on the war in Ukraine. More than just an opinionated billionaire, he's a key player in the conflict as commander of the Wagner Group, a private army of mercenaries. The war in Ukraine is not the first for Wagner. They've been active across Africa, fighting in Libya, Syria, and Mali, gaining a reputation for brutality along the way. But despite the army's experience, Prigozhin says it lacks organization.
We started this wonderful special operation on February 24, 2022. We stomped around for a month and then came to a standstill. We got our butts kicked from many directions, and what did we see? An army that is creaking. No management, no training, no weapons. You can't understand it? It's a total mess.
But how did Yevgeny Prigozhin gain such importance? The St. Petersburg native had a troubled start in life, spending most of his 20s behind bars for robbery and theft. After his release, he set up a chain of hot dog stalls in his hometown and earned enough money to open a restaurant in the mid-90s. The new venture allowed him to mix with Russia's high and mighty, including Vladimir Putin. Later, Putin even started taking his foreign guests there, earning Prigozhin the nickname Putin Chef. But it was only after Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 that signs began to emerge that Prigozhin was not an ordinary businessman. Since then, Prigozhin has not only become a public figure as Putin's confidant, he has transformed into a politician in his own right. And over the course of the war, he has ruffled feathers among Russia's elite. The oligarch has constantly blamed Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu for not providing ammunition to Wagner. He has even gone as far as threatening them with dire consequences.
I'm requesting Shoigu Sergei to provide ammunition immediately. In case of his refusal, I consider it necessary to inform the Supreme Commander-in-Chief about the existing major problems in the Wagner PMC around Bakhmut.
Prigozhin's relationship with the Kremlin is also beginning to crack over his political demagogy. He may enjoy a lot of leeway from Putin when it comes to the war in Ukraine, but not when it comes to his political ambitions. The gap is growing between the role that Putin has assigned him and the political place he believes he deserves, especially with Wagner's future being uncertain.
A fact is that the Wagner PMC is coming to an end. It will cease to exist in the near future. We will be part of history, and that's okay.
For now, Prigozhin is not prepared to politically challenge his president, but that could change if his long-term patron shows signs of losing his grip on Russia's power structure.
Let's bring back in Roman Goncharenko in Bonn and Nick Connolly, if we can, in just a moment in Kyiv. Roman, I'll come to you first. We heard there in that report a gap growing between the role that Putin has put Prigozhin in and where he sees himself. Where do you expect we can see him in the coming weeks based on this video and that report we've just seen?
Well, it's not clear at the moment where this will lead us, but it seems very unlikely that the situation will continue just like before, because this tension between Prigozhin's Wagner Group and the Russian Defense Ministry has been growing. We are now seeing kind of a tipping point, I would say, and the situation will depend, of course, a lot on what will happen in Bakhmut itself. So if Russian forces will lose their control over large parts of that city and will have to retreat, I think we will see heads rolling probably in the Russian Defense Ministry. I can also think that maybe the Russian president will try to calm things down, not to let things boil over, but they are boiling over as we speak. So it is very unprecedented what we are seeing. The language that Mr. Prigozhin is using, speaking about the Russian defense minister, doesn't leave much of a space for Putin to decide. So maybe he will try to somehow reorganize the Russian forces there. Maybe Prigozhin's forces will be reintegrated in any other form. It is not clear. But the situation is very, very dangerous for the Russian leader.
Yeah, and it does seem like Prigozhin is trying to potentially bring about this tipping point in Bakhmut that you've mentioned. Nick, let's come to you in Kyiv. What is the view from Ukraine on this announcement? Have we heard any reaction?
There haven't been any kind of big people speaking yet kind of on the record, but there's certainly kind of the sound of hands being rubbed. There is glee and satisfaction that this kind of open power struggle in Russia is now reaching this kind of crystallization point. This is something that has been expected for a while now. There was the expectation that given this special military operation, as it's known in Russia, hasn't brought about the kind of lightning gains and the propaganda wins for Vladimir Putin, that it would be just a matter of time before basically Russia's political scene starts attributing blame for this effective defeat or the lack of wins. And there's always been the hope that eventually that would be the thing that allows Ukraine to take back not only the territory that it's lost to Russian control since the 24th of February 22, but also maybe Crimea and other parts of the country. They're really, for all the Western weapons, people here are acutely aware of the fact that they're basically going to need Russia to kind of go into meltdown, into internal problems, to be able to really make progress and to return all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory to Kyiv's control.
Right, and can you give us more detail about where Ukraine sees itself in terms of the Battle of Bakhmut? We know it's been one of the longest and bloodiest of this war. And at some point, there were U.S. officials and analysts urging Ukraine to let go Bakhmut because they saw it as not necessarily a strategic goal to be won, and were putting pressure there. Have we seen any change from the Ukrainian side in terms of how they view it?
I think there hasn't been any willingness to leave Bakhmut yet. I think if it does happen, it would always happen very quickly without us seeing much in the way of clues beforehand. Obviously, they would want to do it without the Russians knowing it's coming. But I think they feel vindicated. Obviously, we don't know the numbers in terms of Russian losses and Ukrainian losses. If you kind of take a step back from the kind of destruction and loss of life and all the kind of human aspect of it all, the question is this a good investment, as cynical as that sounds, of Ukrainian lives to create greater damage to the Russian side in the hope that then that allows the Ukrainians to strike somewhere else on the front lines having done a lot of damage to the Russian side and depriving them of the people they would need to defend areas like Zaporizhia, the Zaporizhia region, which they control in part, or in the east bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson. So until we know those numbers, until we know quite how much damage Ukraine was able to do, we don't know if it was a good investment, a good strategic guess, but certainly no one is willing right now in Kiev to say that was a mistake, that was not worth doing. They currently control, we believe, about 15, maybe 20% of Bakhmut, but they have been able to protect the main road going in and out, which has also been crucial to prevent being surrounded by Russian forces. Every couple of days you hear the Russians pushing, trying to kind of cut that supply route, and then every couple of days later you hear that the Russian forces have been pushed backwards by sometimes a couple of hundred meters, maybe a kilometer at most. So this is obviously very intractable. It is very gruesome. It is, fighting on a scale and of the kind that people probably will remember from films about the First World War. But so far, Ukraine thinks that this was a gamble that paid off.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. That's Nick Connolly for us in Kyiv. We've also been speaking to DW's Russia analyst Roman Goncharenko in Bonn. Many thanks to you both.